Well, let's talk about one of the biggest news stories that's happening with leadership and the courts is Donald Trump being sued for everything, right? So without getting into the politics of it or anything like that, there was some news that leaked, over the last week or so, that was a tape of his that he was boasting to people, and all links are down below of these articles or links to YouTube videos that we're referring to, whatever, where there were some tapes, recordings leaked of him boasting about some of the things that were happening with the wars and all that sort of stuff, and him supposedly referring to classified papers that he jokes about. Oh, that should have been classified, but it wasn't, or whatever. Like, there's all this stuff. Now, Dr. Rod, this is when we saw these tapes come out, it was very interesting that there was all that, like, especially all the right wing side of things that we tend to watch on YouTube, or the right wing commentators, everything like that. So these tapes are fake and everything like that. Like there was all this uproar, like, are they real? Are they fake? Are they whatever? The one thing that I actually got from this was quite interesting and felt that we could discuss is, it's interesting that whether these tapes are true or not, if they're real, are these tapes real or not? I think for the lesson that I learned from it is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they're real or not. What it actually matters is the perception, right? And what I got from this is everyone talking about, well, these are fake or whatever, but because of Trump's track record, because of his unfiltered way of communicating and the way that he does things, even if these tapes were fake, it just is so in line with his character or the history of the things that he's done that I kind of felt, well, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. And I think that this is a lesson that we as leaders should learn, is sometimes it's not necessarily whether we do a thing or not. Like we were actually talking about last week about perceived, what was it that we were talking about last week, Dr. Rod?
There was conflicts of interest, Craig.
Conflict of interest, that's right. We're talking about perceived and actual and everything like that. That the perception is sometimes not is just as bad as the actual. And the perception, we as leaders need to be very careful of what we perceived of doing, and that's in line with our character and our history and the evidence of things we've done in the past. What's your take on this tape situation?
Well, without going into any sort of discussion about whether or not it's fake, I think one leadership lesson is very clear. Don't assume that everybody in the room at any particular time is on your side.
That's true. Now, what's actually really interesting is apparently the people that were recording this were reporters.
And publishers, I think there were.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was a publisher's representative in the room as well. So, my understanding is that they were interviewing Donald Trump as part of the overall preparation for the writing of a book.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Journalists, writers, journalists.
Well, writers.
So they're obviously recording, and I wouldn't be surprised if he knew that they were recording. I mean, he actually turned around at one stage and said, "Oh, and this is off the record," and then kept talking. I don't know. I see that in movies, like, oh no, this is off the record, and by law they're not allowed to put it in or whatever. But I don't know. I don't trust that. If you're going to say this is off the record, You shouldn't be
Nothing's off
talking
the
about
record.
it.
Nothing's off the record. It's really just, I guess, a moral plea
Yeah.
that if I'm going to level with you, this is stuff that shouldn't get out in the public arena. But a leader should never, ever assume that anything they say, anything they write won't be used against them at some time in the future.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, you can't assume that everybody in the room is on your side.
Yeah, that's really good. Don't assume everyone's. Well, I'd take that one step further. Just assume that everyone in the room is against you. Is that a bad thing?
Look, I don't think I'd be quite as cynical as all that. But I think if you make the assumption that not everyone is on your side, that really goads you into using a good deal of wisdom.
Yeah.
And look, I would have to say my impression from afar, because I've never been with Donald Trump, is that sometimes he could use a little bit more wisdom than he does. He can be a little bit thoughtless at times and perhaps not necessarily looking a long way in the future. Some people will use the expression, how does my comment or how does my behaviour age? And if the answer is,
That's
well,
really
it
good.
might not age all that well, then perhaps you shouldn't do it in the first place.
That's good. How does my comment age? That's really good. Does it age like a fine wine or a scotch or whiskey, or does it age like some old fish?
Look, my wife made a comment just yesterday. We were sitting with a senior pastor from one of the larger churches here on the Gold Coast, and we were talking about this very thing. And she said, well, we actually watch a lot of old movies. One reason for that is you can get them for free, but we watch a lot of old movies. And you look at the dialogues in some of those movies and attitudes that are portrayed, well, you probably wouldn't get away with that in any production today. So it's a good question to ask. Looking forward, how will my comments or how will my behaviours age?
I think, going back to your statement of don't assume that everyone is going to be for you. I must admit that I have a weakness, a fault, or what I don't know what you would claim it to be, but I do have a tendency. I can get over familiar, like over comfortable with some people. That you think that they're right or die, you think you're best friends and everything like that, and you just get comfortable. I know there's times that I've just gotten super comfortable with people that, a year or two later, you've said something and they've gotten offended because you got too comfortable with them, and so how do we draw that line? How do we draw that line with, because it's quite commonly spoken about, be friendly but not familiar. That kind of statement.
I think that as leaders, our objective shouldn't be to make friends. Now, I know that doesn't sound too good, but I was reading an article by another pastor actually yesterday, looking at the difference between leading and entertaining. And if you see yourself as a leader, but your main objective is to have as many people following you as possible, then you're probably not a leader. You're probably an entertainer. And I think the same thing applies to friendship. Building friendships and leading are just not the same thing.
That's good.
You look at the life of Jesus, he really only had a very few close, intimate friendships. And he actually said to them, I call you friends.
Yeah.
Now, there weren't many, just a small core of people whom he called friends. But yet, of course, he led, during his lifetime on earth, tens of thousands of people. But he wasn't friendly, or he wasn't a friend of all of those people. So if I can say to leaders, listen, your primary role, it isn't about creating friendships. It's about building influence and empowering people. in
Yeah.
turn to exercise leadership to one degree or another. We all need friends. We
Yep.
all need friends. You and I both know that. We've been on the planet long enough to realize we cannot do life on our own. We need Jesus. We need that relationship with God through Jesus. And we also need some close, intimate friends who love us enough to tell us the truth and to keep us on the right track. But I would say if you're a leader who tries to lead by building friendships, then actually you're not a leader at all.
Yeah, there's a theory that we talk about in our leadership development program, free leadership development program. Yes, shameless plug. Link is in the description. Go and check it out. But we speak about that in our program where we talk about it's important for you as a leader to categorize the people that are around you, right, and communicate to each of them in an according way. Like, so for example, the first tier is just there's always a lot of spectators around you, and this is taken directly from Jesus. I won't go too deep into it because we do it in the program, but Jesus had a lot of spectators. There were a lot of spectators that followed him around. Then he spoke to them in parables and just sort of that was it. Like, and why did he speak to them like that? Because he says those who have eyes to see, they see. If they have ears to hear, they hear. But just sort of saying that this is just going to go over the head of people, so I'm not even going to bother, right? And I'm just going to talk in parables to them. Then you have the society, right? And the society is the people that they're kind of bought in, which was kind of like Jesus' disciples, which people, not the 12, the 400 odd that were following him around, right? They were all bought in, and he would turn around and he would interpret the parables to them. So he'd teach them a bit. He'd just tell stories to the spectators, to the society. He would teach them, and then you have your select, getting down to your select few, where Jesus had Peter, James, and John. That was it, right? Peter, James, and John, they were the ones who went with him everywhere. They were the ones that he always took away to pray with him and saw him in vulnerable times and everything like that. So we've got I skip. There's a couple of other steps in there, but for time's sake, I'll skip that. But we've got to make sure that we have those people, and we know that we communicate with them differently to what we do with the other people around us. So just make sure that's probably the important thing to take away from this. Make sure when you're communicating, you categorize those people. Where are these people, and how should I communicate to them differently? I don't mean like talk down to people or ignore people or anything like that. It's just you just don't give as much personal information or as much information to certain people, just because they won't be as bought in as possible. Now, the other part of that, Dr. Rod, was just the fact that when they're talking about it being, fake, it being that they were saying like it was a deep fake or whatever of the recording or whatever. The fact that he has a history of talking like this and everything, it just made it so much harder to, even if it was fake. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, maybe it's fake. But I still believe that he did it or something like it. How do we as leaders make sure that when accusations come against us and things like that, that our past, our history will actually speak for itself?
Well, we have to apply wisdom every time we open our mouths, I think, and that's a difficult thing. Because often, we're thrust into a situation where we don't have time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
Not like this podcast where we have at least 24 hours to look at all the background references and to sit down and think about how our conversation may go. Obviously, we don't script it. But one of the things that exercises my mind a lot is the need to speak wisely. Partly because obviously we're trying to inform leaders how they can become better leaders, but also because I don't want this podcast to die because we get banned or worse, somebody sues us. So I want to speak truth. I want to encourage leaders to become better leaders, but I also don't want to restrict the effectiveness of this podcast by saying something which could actually end up being used to shoot it down. That's not to say I'm frightened of dissent or disagreement or anything like that. By no means. But I do think I need to apply wisdom in what I say, because I don't want to undermine the purpose for which this whole podcast exists. And I think we need to take that attitude into every area of leadership. Just as a bit of an aside, I was thinking, well, if I was advising Donald Trump on how to approach the court case over all this, maybe what I should say is, well, you guys all know I'm a buffoon. I didn't mean any of that. Come on, guys. Everybody knows I'm a buffhead. I wasn't trying to undermine national security. I don't know how that would go in court. I really don't. But anyway, and I'm not a lawyer either, which is probably just as well.
and it probably wouldn't help his 2024
probably not. No, elect me. You need a buffhead.
Well, I'm just an idiot, so
you need a
don't
buffhead as
a
president after the one we've had for the last 4 years. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. Look, it's I just kind of like, I want to implore leaders to just be aware that your past, your history is going to be what you're judged by. Now, not talking about going into heaven and what Jesus judges you by. We know that if you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, we know that he's judged by that. But as leaders, I know that it clearly states in the Bible that we will be held account for what we actually do as leaders as well. But not just that. And obviously that's not going to determine our entry into heaven. It's just we're probably going to get a bad rap on the knuckles or something from Jesus for not stewarding the people we've been given to lead. But that aside, that's a whole another conversation. But the world will judge you if something comes up. And now in this world of deep fakes, that AI is just getting better and better, and we will just see more and more deep fakes come about, and they'll be better and better. And it'll be so much harder for people to see what is real and what isn't. The best way for people to know and be able to judge what you've done is by your history. So what does your history say about you? What does your past say about you? What are your true everyday actions? I don't mean just, when you put on the spotlight and just like, hey, this is what I'm performing. I'm not talking about those moments. I mean, like your day to day. What's your character revealing in your everyday actions that people can set as a standard of seeing something and going, no, that's not him or that's not her. I know what she's really like. I know what he's really like. So make sure your actions every day are revealing your true character so that it will be the thing that stands up as evidence against any accusations against you. Hey, that was an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, faith-based leadership development content, make sure you check out our channel, give it a subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when we release new content.